Good morning, gang, and welcome to this week's first set of video lessons. Today we're going to be talking about the square roots of a perfect square, but not only are we going to be talking about square roots of a perfect square, but just square roots in general. This is the first of the next 4 videos, so there's 5 total for today's lessons. So before we find the square root of a perfect square, we need to first discuss what a perfect square is. A perfect square happens when you multiply an integer times itself and you get a product out of that. So let's look at the definition. So the definition of a perfect square is the product of an integer multiplied by itself. So let's look at a couple of the examples I've written down. For example, 7 times 7 is 49. So I have an integer times itself producing a product. And then I have negative 6 times negative 6 equals 36. Now if you notice, finding a perfect square is we would just square each integer. So for a perfect square, you just square it, multiplying it by itself. And the next thing we need to look at is the square root. And the square root is essentially the number you multiply by itself to get the product. So let's look at that definition and a couple of examples really quick. Alright. A square root is a number times itself that gives you a product. And we're just going to look at it as a number times itself. Because all we need to use the square root for is just to tell us what number is multiplied by itself to give us this product. And it can be rational or irrational. So it can be an integer or it can be an irrational decimal number, which we'll learn more about this later. So for example, the square root of 4 is 2 because 2 times 2 equals 4. So because 2 times itself equals 4, any given product, the square root of 4 is 2. So before we go on, we're going to look at square roots of perfect squares. So we should understand what a perfect square is again. It's the product of an integer multiplied by itself. So let's go through and talk about the first 12 perfect squares. And these ones are going to be ones that you want to know by heart over the next couple of years. So let's look at the first example. So I'm going to put up the first couple of examples here. So if we look at the first few perfect squares, we see that we're going to take the first 12 integers, multiply them by themselves, and see what their products are. So if you look, we have 1 times 1, and that equals 1. If you look at the next one, we have 2 times 2, and that equals 4. We have 3 times 3, and that equals 9. And then we have 4 times itself, which equals 16. So far we're just taking integers and multiplying them by themselves. So what I want for you to do is to take 5 through 12, multiply them by themselves like we did here, and find those products. So take a couple of seconds to do that right now. Okay, so now we know a few things about finding square roots. We need to make a couple of statements. First, we know that we can find the square root of 9 now. We know what the square root of 9 is because we know that 3 times 3 equals 9. So the square root of 9 is 3. But a really common mistake that beginners make with finding square roots is they try and tell me that the square root of 2 equals 1. But we haven't talked about non-perfect square roots yet. There is no number multiplied by itself that gives you 2. So one thing people do is they try and take the square root and divide it by 2 and get the answer that way. But we can't do that. We have to remember that the square root is a number times itself. And dividing by 2 doesn't give a number to multiply by itself. Okay, so this is not a true statement, so we should not do this. Okay, so don't ever do that. Let's look at the first example here. Square root of a perfect square. What number is equal to 49? So here we need to think, and I want to write this in red. It's really important for us to think this thought right here. So we're going to write think. We want to think what number times itself equals 49. Okay? And so to answer the question, what number is equal to the square root of 49, this symbol means square root. So let's get back to our question. What times itself equals 49? Well, if we go up to our box, we should have it all filled out by now. And we should know that 6 times 6 is 36. That's not quite it. So what's 7 times 7? Well, that equals 49. So the square root of 49 equals 7. And these are just facts that we're going to need to work on memorizing. The next videos will be shorter now that we've set up perfect squares and square roots. So what I need for you to do is there are 4 examples right underneath of this one that you need to fill out on your own and have ready for class tomorrow. Thank you.